Hi there. My name is Gordon Lithgow, and I'm a co-founder of a company called Gerostate Alpha. And our company makes drugs for aging. And I want to talk about what that means. Drugs for aging. It sounds a little science fiction-y, a little weird, but it's real. It's not science fiction anymore. So I trained as a geneticist in Scotland, and in the late 90s, I was looking for something interesting to work on. And I realized that if you looked around the field of biology, there was a lot of information about a lot of different aspects in biology, development and growth and so on. But there was nothing about aging. What caused aging? Why does aging happen? What's the molecular and biochemical processes that drive aging? Just didn't exist. You couldn't go out and buy a textbook on the biology of aging. And so I searched around the world looking for people who were also interested in this area. And one evening I was sitting on the floor of a large library. I was working for a pharmaceutical company in Switzerland. And I came across this publication. I didn't quite understand it, but after reading it a few times, I began to grasp that what was going on was that a researcher in the University of Colorado, Tom Johnson, had discovered a gene that was somehow controlling the rate of aging of an animal. This paper was published in Science, and I was blown away. I knew the power of genetics and the idea that if you could find a gene that controls a biological process, you can clone that gene, you can find out what it does. And so here was a way to understand what aging was. I was very lucky to join Tom Johnson's lab in Colorado, along with one of Gerostate Alpha's co-founders, Simon Melov. And we worked together in the early years of what is now considered the really golden era of understanding the genetics of lifespan in animals. And what we've discovered over the last 20 years or so is that well, actually two things. And one part of it is bad news, and one part of it is good news. So the bad news is that the aging is intimately linked mechanistically to disease, chronic diseases of late life, including Alzheimer's, cancer, osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, sarcopenia, on and on and on, all of the diseases that in late life afflict us. It's the bad news. And it's bad because it sounds like, in saying it that way, it sounds like disease is inevitable. And actually the good news is it's not. And so what we learned, first of all, in very simple animals in the laboratory, microscopic invertebrates, and then into mammals, including mice, was that the diseases of aging were not inevitable. And the reason for that is that if you target aging either genetically, as we were doing way back then, but now pharmacologically with small molecules, that you can, first of all, extend lifespan, which is amazing. You take an animal that normally lives 20 days and it'll live 100 days if you do the appropriate manipulations. But perhaps more importantly, we've discovered that when you intervene in aging mechanisms, you postpone or prevent the onset of chronic disease. Now, the kind of diseases I'm talking about here are some of the most fearful, debilitating, socioeconomically impactful diseases ever to affect human beings. Alzheimer's disease, trillions of dollars poured into looking after people and looking after the families of people who are suffering from this incredibly debilitating condition. And it's fair to say that the biomedical community have not really successfully approached Alzheimer's or found cures, and one of many chronic diseases that are not curable, and essentially we spend our time treating the symptoms of these diseases. But let's go back to the good news, because the good news is that aging is malleable. It's plastic and we can manipulate it in the lab. And I, as a very conservative scientist, I have come to the conclusion that actually what we're seeing in the lab is now really important in terms of the potential for human health, the potential for therapies for diseases such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So why do I say that? Well, let's think about what happens to most of us. Most of us, unfortunately, will get into our 70s, 80s, 90s. By that point, we'll have a number of different conditions, comorbidities. We're going to be being treated for maybe, things that are going on with our joints, arthritis. We may also be being treated for a cancer, and we may be seeing the first signs of neurological disease. Life expectancy has grown amazingly well. And that's a great success story of biomedicine, that life expectancy is where it is, and in the best examples in the mid-80s and beyond. But unfortunately, the disease state is something that most of us face. Now, we know that that's not inevitable either, because there are people like the centenarians who live to 100, 110, and they are able to escape most of these diseases. And amazingly, frequently, they have a very short period of time of illness, of morbidity, and then they pass. And I think that's what we all want, right? We want to be living healthily through our 80s and 90s, disease-free, contributing to society, having our second careers, looking after our great grandkids. We want to be free from disease deep into late life. What we're seeing in the laboratory is precisely that. We are seeing that we can intervene in aging using natural products, metabolites, pharmaceutical-like agents in mice, in mammals. And we believe a lot of what goes on in aging is the same from the invertebrates to the mice to us. And what we're seeing is that we can replicate that story of the centenarians, where we see a lifespan extension. We see a postponement of many of the aging characteristics, and then a shorter period of morbidity at the end of life. And the young scientists that are doing these experiments in labs right now, including the Buck Institute, where I ended up and Simon ended up, it's very powerful. It's very powerful to see the longevity and the youthfulness of animals that have undergone these treatments. And so Gerostate Alpha has grown out of this simply looking down a microscope, looking in a cage of mice and seeing longevity. And so what we mean by drugs for aging is not that we're promising the fountain of youth or immortality or any of that stuff. All we're saying is that studying aging and targeting aging with interventions has the possibility of generating new therapeutic avenues for the worst chronic diseases of late life. I never thought that I would be fortunate enough to see something that looks like a scientific revolution. But that's what it is. Because if we have new therapeutic approaches to the kind of diseases I'm talking about, then that represents essentially a revolution in the way that we do medicine and the way that we do research into diseases. By targeting aging, our hope, and maybe even more than that, our certainty that we can develop therapies for the worst chronic conditions of late life is revolutionary. So drugs for aging is a ridiculously ambitious byline, but it's also true. So please join us. Join us in any way you can to spread the word about the research that's going on. This is solid scientific research published in the finest scientific journals in the world. This is not pseudoscience. This is real, and it's happening right now. We're at an inflection point in the field where the biology of aging, which has been essentially a science project, is turning into the new biotechnology, the new industry of medicine. And join us on that journey. Thanks for listening.